to the Governing Your Atlassian Stack webinar. Governance isn't something that sounds as exciting as implementing brand new features and impressive use cases. However, it is necessary so that these business cases are able to run successfully on a well-performing Jira or Confluence. In this seminar, you will learn about the three main areas of Atlassian tools governance that can make or break your application and that are very useful to practice and keep in mind. First, some introductions. My name is Kamil Ber. I come from Prague, Czech Republic, and I've been working for Atlassian partners for 5 years. Outside of this, I have administered the Atlassian toolset for Vodafone Czech Republic for a year and a half, and my specialty is clearing up cluttered Jiras and Confluences and setting usage standards and governance. Along with me here is Damien Lauberton. Damien, could you please take a minute to introduce yourself?
So yes, my name is Damien. I'm Hidalgo Sales Manager for France, and I'm also an Atlassian certified consultant. I'm really happy to be here with you all, and thank you, Camille, for allowing me to introduce myself.
Our roles will be twofold. I will be presenting today's webinar, and Damien will answer the questions that you, the viewers, will have in the chat. So, after an introduction to the topic of governance, today's webinar will focus on the three main topics. Change management, which is the process of how users can request changes and new features, and how to have it work for you. Documentation, what should be documented, and some tips on how to do it. And finally, cleanups and archiving, how to declutter your instance and remove unused objects. And of course, why does a staging instance play such a pivotal role in it? However, we do not want this to be a one-way lecture, but more a workshop. What this means that if you have any questions, comments, ideas, or simply something to add, please write it down in chat. We will answer throughout the course. That said, it's been proven that the more you ask and engage, the more you will get from the webinar. As for its length, the webinar should take somewhere around 90 minutes to 2 hours the most. And as we will be working with a lot of information, we'll also have a 10-minute pause after the first 45 minutes, which is 3:45 Central European time. So, first of all, a question for you. Why are you here? Why have you decided to attend this webinar about governance? Let us know in chat, please. Okay, so we got a reply here. I'm new to Jira to understand more about Atlassian products, but also a cleanup before you migrate to cloud. And I think that's a very interesting topic since the cleanup is always good to do before you migrate to any other deployment, so you don't have to carry the clutter from the previous deployment. And that's a fair point, and it's something that we will focus on throughout the course. Okay, Rolf is saying that I'm running a governance board already. All right, so hopefully you are already working with all of these practices we will be showing you. So we hope you will get some inspiration from maybe some of the new things that we will present that are different from your governance. Great. Cleanup is needed before migrating to cloud. Okay, now that's very common, and hopefully we can tackle it either today or during future webinars because, well, a messy Jira, Confluence, or Bitbucket is very common, and it's good to know how to, well, how to work with it or how to get rid of all the redundant data. All right, thank you for replies. There's a lot of stuff here. So let's proceed. So let's dive right into the topic, and that is what is governance and how it applies to Atlassian tools. That's something to answer first. So what exactly is governance? What does the word itself mean? So Merriam-Webster Dictionary describes governance as an act of process or a process of governing or overseeing the control and direction of something. This is a very important definition for our case. Why? Well, governing Atlassian tools certainly isn't a one-time thing. It's not something that you do just once. For the governance to work most effectively, it is best to adhere to central standards, such as having a reduced static number of administrators that uphold the governance rules, or an ongoing change request system in place that you cannot compromise on. It's a process. It's not a one-time thing. Also, uploading governance is mainly the job of the administrators. They decide what will happen on their applications, which they govern. Other users, like the project admins, can of course help them out, but the whole task of running the governance process is on the system administrators. Finally, the governed thing is, of course, the Atlassian tools. The admin's task is to get under control what already happened in the application in the past and what didn't really go well, remedying by various cleanups, for example. That is the control part, gaining back the control. The second part, the direction, is about defining what is actually allowed to happen in the applications in the future by setting usage standards and streamlining the change management process. What is also a good point is what actually happens without governance. It could be, well, a lot of these things. Without proper governance in place, the work in the application often suffers. The damage might not be as visible on a small instance, but on a large instance, a lot of problems may occur. Some of them I have mentioned here, and for those that don't know what a bus factor is, a bus factor means that if an administrator gets hit by a proverbial bus, the application will fall apart because he was the only one with the necessary know-how of running it. Now, if governance sounds so easy, why aren't companies or users doing it? These are some of the most common reasons, beginning with the lack of budget to hire another admin that would help you out, often for reasons like no immediate results or a hardly quantifiable return of investment. Or maybe the lack of time because the admins are doing other more pressing things. Not strictly adhering to business requirements or business use cases might sound a bit counterintuitive because that's what the tool is for, right? But the problem begins when a business person or other Atlassian layman presses heavily for a certain feature he needs to see. However, by implementing it exactly as the requester wants, many best practices can be violated, and even though the use case may work as intended, it might become clumsy and time-consuming to maintain. Finally, governance might not be applied because it's not clear what exactly should be done. To be more concrete, again, these are some of the most common symptoms of a lack of governance, ranging from too many administrators setting up the instance, redundant custom fields, statuses, issue types, add-ons, apps, you name it, no documentation, no standards, what the users can expect, no trainings, no upgrades. I think we all saw a few of these. Now, what might not be apparent immediately that there is a real return of investment if you use governance. Costs may be saved on, let's say, licenses or apps. Time can be saved, adjusting clumsy workflows, simplifying complex setups, getting rid of complicated add-ons, things like that. And honestly, many intimidating business requirements can be actually implemented using best practices if both sides spend time collaborating and, well, best practices can also be learned. This is one of the goals of this webinar, to introduce you to ways of how to not only you can remedy possible troubles or misconfigurations, but also to prevent similar problems in the future. Here are several useful books and articles on the topic of upholding best practices. All of these are commercially available as ebooks and paperbacks. They provide a much more in-depth view of the topic we will be covering today, and frankly are very good reference points if you want to broaden your Atlassian governance knowledge. The only downside is that they are mostly limited to Jira, but the universal principles can be applied even on other tools like Confluence or Bitbucket. Let's visit the first topic of governance, and that is change management. But first, let's define what exactly change management is. What do you imagine when someone says change management? What does it mean for you? Please let us know in chat. That's exactly what change management is about. New demand for plugins, workflows, new custom fields. Yes, absolutely, that's a part of it. Defining and tracking changes. Absolutely, that's also a part of change management. Changes in software procedures training, and yep, that's exactly what the change management in this case is and what we'll be talking about. Thank you for your replies, guys. So what exactly is change management in case of this webinar? Well, for the purpose of the presentation, I have decided to use a somewhat simpler definition that you might find in ITIL books, for example. So change management in the context of Atlassian governance means a way of implementing either a new request or a change the user wants, because that happens all the time. Users want new things or want to change existing processes. So tip number one is to reduce your number of administrators to 2 or 3 at the absolute minimum. The number becomes higher, like 3 as I mentioned, with sufficiently large instances, where one administrator, for example, takes care of an Atlassian help desk, and the other one implements previously requested changes, or does, let's say, maintenance work. This is one of the most common mistakes that happens. Now, usually Atlassian tools get employed or deployed for a small team where everyone has admin rights because they know each other and they're able to tell each other what are they changing or what are they doing. However, as the tools become adopted by a larger team, admin rights might be also given freely to whoever requires them, so he can set up what he wants. However, you suddenly find yourself with several thousand user instance with tens of admins as the Atlassian Stack grows. This happens very often and grows just as fast. So the correct step is to reduce the admin team to a select few, and this is so they can easily keep in touch with each other regarding the application changes and can actually hold each other accountable if anything goes wrong. This is much easier to do in 2 or 3 people instead of like 10-person team. If you want to take back control over the application, this is absolutely necessary. Now, good candidates for the Atlassian administrator status are in general veteran Atlassian admins that know well how to work in the tools, or they have proven their knowledge and gained a certification. Knowledge of similar tools also helps. Much more, however, you will encounter bad candidates. These include any random team leader or scrum master that absolutely knows what to set up. But more often than not, however, they will simply implement the changes they need for their team, and that's it. Another bad practice that often occurs is to give the admin rights to the cheapest employee the company finds. And by cheap, I mean an employee that gets paid the least because they can actually, how to say, they can afford assigning him to a tool like Jira or Confluence, quote unquote, of course. This very often happens to QA testers for some reason who are given Jira as like an extra job. However, what happens is that they won't have time for both jobs. So why do it then? Lastly, someone who cannot allocate his time and focus to the Atlassian administration task at hand is probably not a good candidate either. What this all means is that you shouldn't give out administrator permissions to simply anyone who asks. Simple as that. Of course, your users might object as to how fast will the tickets be implemented if there's so few admins. Luckily, there's a way to take care of that too. Use a dedicated Jira support project. To collect the user requests at an optimal speed and practice, stop accepting them via email. Really. Yes, it's a very simple way of getting in touch with the support team. It's also terribly ineffective. What will happen if the person implementing the mailed change leaves the company? His mailbox gets deleted, and there's no history or proof of how the change went, why did he implement it the way he or she implemented it, were there any workarounds, were there any compromises? Yeah. So instead, leverage your Atlassian tools. Use a Jira project. If you have a Jira service desk / management, the better. Make it as easy for your users as if they were sending an email. The workflow for your support project can be actually very simple. Users create a request and it goes to the status open. Then it transitions into in progress. If you need any verification from the original requester, you would transition it into the to be verified status. Same with when you want the requester to approve the solution. Finally, you close the issue or let the requester do it. If the request isn't possible to implement, you would choose a global transition of cancel. Again, this can be implemented in a Jira core project or in a Jira software project, but there certainly is something of the JSD/JSM projects, the service desk ones, that simply make it very simple for any kind of user to add his ticket. So both types of Jira projects can be actually leveraged for this. Of course, the reason why using a dedicated project is so useful is that you can easily document changes the users request to return to them later. Who wanted what? What was the requirement? How exactly was it implemented? Was there any technical debt, for example? And all the admins see this. They all have access to the raised requests. These issues will also remain in the system, so any admins that actually come after your team can easily access them later. Without such a system or a help desk, you will need to search all the channels the request could have came from. Did it come through email? Did it come through Slack, Teams? Not to mention your phone, which again would cost extra time. And we're back at the start where we were talking about the lack of time for governance. You can actually gain time by deploying a support project this way. I have also mentioned something called referencing here on this slide. So what does this mean? So referencing, in this case, would mean leaving a note on the new object, leading back to the relevant ticket. This way, you would immediately know that if you have an object that may be fairly disconnected from the necessary context, like a script, a project, a custom field, or anything really, you can easily find the context by searching for a ticket's issue key in the object's description. And what exactly this means? Well, there's not much more to it, frankly, than this, marking the new object with the issue key. Thanks to this, it will be easier to get to the ticket explaining why was the new object created. Let's say an admin that joins the organization a few years later will come to his will come to his work, and he will easily be able to access the tickets from which the project on the left, for example, was created, or the issue type on the right was created. Same goes for scripts. And from linking the objects with the tickets, you will get back to the original request, where you will read why was it implemented this way, or were there any caveats, technical debt, and things like that. So this is also one of the upsides of using the help desk, that you can reference everything back to it, or to the issue key. Finally, using a test instance and or a staging instance to try out any large scale on invasive changes first is the way to go. By a testing instance, we mean an application where you can test out various changes, and by a staging instance, we mean an application identical to the production one. The difference between testing and staging is the data around it. A staging instance should simulate production, whereas a testing instance serves simply to try out the newly implemented feature, really, like run a new script. On server and data center, it's easy to get a staging or testing instance. Simply use the developer license. On cloud, you do not have a development license, but you can create a one-time testing instance by subscribing for a trial version of the application and then uploading your production backup there. For example, trying out new Groovy or SIL scripts on a testing instance first is a must. Since we admins often aren't developers, we might miss some important lines of code that could do considerable damage. Same goes for installing resource-intensive apps like EasyBR or BigPicture, or integrations with third-party applications outside of the Atlassian suite. So these are the 4 areas in which you can improve your Atlassian change management to enjoy better governance. Reduce the number of administrators, use a dedicated Jira support project, link new objects with their tickets, and use a staging and or a testing instance. So before we move on to the next part, do you have any questions regarding the topic of change management? Please write them down for us in chat and we will answer them there. I see that we have a few polls. Thanks, Damien, for creating them. And most of you have a support project in Jira to collect user requests. So I suppose that was a good refresher, or something that you already use. And most of you are also using a staging or test instance in your organization. Again, this is one of the best practices and also a way to make sure the changes don't damage your production instance. Okay, so if you do not have any questions regarding the process of change management, let's move on to the next part, and that is documentation. The second area in which you can make your governance more effective is documenting. So what should we document exactly? Well, there are many areas in Atlassian tools that deserve to be documented, of course. But we would like to ask you again, what exactly do you document? What is most important on your Atlassian deployment that you document in it? Please write down your documentation types in chat. Thank you. All right. Mainly the available templates such as workflow schemes, issue types, permissions, etc. Absolutely. We'll be looking into the issue of documenting projects in a short while. Documenting project imports. Now that's interesting. As in, what exactly do you document about them? Is it like documenting the zip files from a configuration manager, or how to do the project import in Jira? That's quite interesting. So if you could tell us a little bit more about it, you definitely appreciate it. Step-by-step guides for the new users. Absolutely, that's a must. Like how to change a password, or how to sign in into Jira, or how to actually raise a support ticket. That's definitely the users should have readily available when they're using the Atlassian tools. Admin procedures, new feature presentation. All right. Yeah, that's really important to get down when upgrading, since a lot of steps are involved. Absolutely. So thanks for your replies again. So why should we document? Transferability, as in, well, this is the reason why documentation makes possible to transfer or share work with another administrator. Because if it is documented, then instead of holding meetings where many things could be forgotten or omitted, well, with documentation, this chance is much lower. So this is something why documentation should also evolve over time. Okay, so back into the chat. It was a reply on the project import question. So what to add from source for project import, custom fields, resolution, workflows. All right, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks. Another reason why should you document is to avoid the bus factor. I already mentioned that the bus factor concerns losing the administrator or the important stakeholder for whatever reason. So this is the reason why companies should approach allowing time and money for documentation. If you avoid the bus factor, then the tool doesn't stop working in the worst case scenario. When there's documentation, another person can actually take on the work that would usually be done by the single knowledge owner, in this case, the admin. Next, and this might be useful even for users just working with, let's say, a Jira or a Bitbucket project or a space, the users themselves can usually use the documentation to get informed. Lastly, when your important application parts are documented, they can serve as a good foundation for cleanups, because you can easily measure which objects are or aren't used, and thus can determine which ones should be archived or removed. There is, however, one type of documentation that in both the short and in the long term is more important than documentation of various objects, and that is a main governance document. Some time ago, I asked various famous Atlassian consultants about their best practice recommendations. A large portion of them told me about having a governance document where you outline which changes you cannot make and refer users that push you hard for their personal changes to this document. This governance document might consist of several parts, but the most important one is the what you will not do part, or what the Atlassian team will not do or will not implement. In this part, you outline various potential blunders and practices that would make your instance harder to work with and maybe even potentially broken and non-functioning. Some of these might include that you do not give out administrator permissions, that you do not give out bulk change permissions, you do not put green statuses, category done, in the middle of a workflow, or use only the same set of statuses and issue types. There definitely might be more, and that depends on your own configuration and the scale of your Atlassian applications. If possible, have the document approved by various important stakeholders. It will then serve as a good blueprint on basis of which you can say that this was a consensus of many stakeholders, so we can't make exceptions or we can't implement what you want. Again, if you're looking to standardize your applications, as in have them functioning similarly, this document is absolutely a must. Users will also definitely request projects and spaces, but there are many important variables to consider now when you create a new object and later when archiving or auditing. The user should provide as much data as possible during the initial request that you can later save and use for your documentation. So, when users request a new space or a new project through your help desk, they should be met with a series of questions they need to answer first. Some of them could be, for example, what is the name of the new project? And its key, the project key. How many users will work there? What is the purpose of the project? But also, when do you expect the project will end? How sensitive are the data in the project? Should they be restricted, for example? And are only some users allowed to see the issues in the project? And so on. You then put this information into a documentation table where you document all of your projects. So an overall project documentation table should be a list of all of your project with columns based on info gained in the survey or in the new project or a new space ticket. You know, the project name, project key, purpose of the project lead, etc. First, you would provide the info for all projects you already have when building this overall object list, in this case, Jira projects. This might take some time, as stakeholders most likely didn't provide sufficient info at the moment. So you would need to ask them first, like, does the project contain sensitive data, or how long is the project, or well, how long are people going to work in this project? So you need to ask these stakeholders first. However, as you will require all the data in your new request type on your help desk, you will simply fill the fields from it into this document. Please note that this is only an example of how the documentation might look. The actual information you used might vary. So I have used in this overall Jira project list the project name, the abbreviation, the project leads, which is an important information because you would know who to contact. regarding this project, how many issues will be created monthly. This is good to gauge how often or how important the project will be now and in the future. What is the project about? Expected project duration is actually interesting to know because when you again do a cleanup, for example, you could read over here if the project is liable for archiving, and you can confirm it with the project lead. Whether the project contains sensitive data makes sense in the information security sense, in it that some companies often have restrictions to what type of data I can actually add in Jira, right? So if you cannot, for example, add a privacy shield or GDPR protected data, well, now is a good time to actually ask around if somebody adds these types of data in the project. To be archived makes sense. Special permissions, this is something that makes sense in restricted projects such as HR onboarding projects or the like, and any additional nodes you might have. Specific object documentation, this is something that again pertains to the Jira projects, but can also work just as well for Confluence spaces or Bitbucket projects/repositories. If you were to put your overall documentation in Confluence, for example, each project would then have its own detailed documentation in the page underneath it. This type of documentation would cover and it has already been set in this chat, the issue types, workflows, screens, permissions, scripts, and other objects used. The purpose of this documentation is to have every setting of the project listed, saving time both for you and the other administrators with manually browsing the projects, reviewing every workflow and every screen and scheme. It could also consist of a very general overview, as seen here on this slide, and then a table below with the list of issue types, outstanding permissions, access rights, used workflows, scripts, and so on. All right, moving on. So no matter if you're using Groovy scripts, sales scripts, or Nunchuck scripts in cloud, they can be scattered all over your systems, be it in workflows, jobs, post functions, and in the case of Groovy, also in script fragments. You would need to absolutely document them somewhere to gauge both their usage on your system and what exactly they do. In Scriptner for Jira, the function called script registry helps somewhat, but you might want to add other information that you need to know, such as compatibility with a future upgrade, what exactly the script does, and if it is still used in active projects, because if not, why not delete it then? Again, create a table summing up all of your scripts divided by type. Add columns with the information you need to know, such as where exactly the script is located, what it does, the script itself, preferably in a collapsible, the expand macro in Confluence, and other information. Last but not least, a part of your documentation should also be a list of apps for every application you will have, be it Jira, Confluence, or Bitbucket. This page should tell you things like the used version, the price of the app, the usage, what the app does, and should help you decide whether to keep a particular app and weigh the pros and cons of keeping it. One of the goals here is to find redundant, unused, or overpriced apps, given how much you really use them. And of course, when exactly are they due for renewal, which applies to all Jira deployments. Of course, when you install a new app, your first step should be to record it over here. Some other ideas of what exactly to document are a list of users with the bulk change permissions and why do they have it. You absolutely shouldn't give out bulk change permissions just to everyone, because if it is misused or well, the user may not know what he's doing. The changes can, of course, be reverted, but in a very difficult way. So not only the bulk changes can be made on, for example, all issues the users can see or edit, but there's also a combination of bulk change and the delete issues permission. And I don't think I have to tell you what happens if a vindictive user uses the bulk change and the delete issues function at the same time. So I would recommend the bulk change global permission to be limited. Groups documenting and whether they are used is also something to consider to get rid of extraneous groups. Bitbucket projects and their specific repositories, and objects created by apps, like advanced roadmaps plans or big picture. How do I call it in big picture? I think it's called boxes, perhaps, and other objects that are created by apps, such as inside object schemes, also, for example. So you know if the apps are actively being used or not. So these are the 4 areas of documentation we recommend to implement. An overall object list, specific object documentation, list of scripts, and a list of apps. We also shouldn't forget the main governance document and the help desk questionnaire whenever someone requests a new object to be created. It might seem hard to document everything at first, actually, and honestly, yes, it does take time. The positive thing about it, though, is that you can create a new library of documentations only once. Plus, you don't need to document everything at the same time, of course. The important thing here is to start with at least something. Let's say document all scripts and add new documentation types as time allows you, perhaps a new documentation library every quarter. Second, what is important when you decide to go the way of documentation is to make sure that new objects of a particular type are documented when they appear and, of course, when they're removed. For example, whenever a new script is added, you would also add it into the respective documentation page. Same when it's deleted. All right, that's it for part 3. Let's hear your questions, comments, and other feedback on using documentation. Please write us in chat and we'll get to it after a 5-minute pause. We'll resume the webinar in 6 minutes.
We are still here. We are just having a little break. Huh?
And I'm browsing the questions in the chat, and there's one with how to run a script runner queries in Jira. If we have a demo of Jira as part of this call, sorry, but we don't. This webinar's topic isn't script runner, but we might consider doing a script runner webinar in the future. Then there's some suggestions for the overall project documentation, like what is the last updated date, how many issues in this project. Absolutely, that's also something that can be added, at least approximately, because the number of issues still changes. There's a question from Carl. Shouldn't scripts be version controlled in a Git project? Yes, absolutely. It's definitely a better approach. But if you don't have Bitbucket or don't use Git, for example, for some reason, or you haven't implemented it for Jira, Jira, then you can at least keep it in Confluence. Okay, so thank you for taking care of the rest of the questions, Damien. Let's move on into the last topic, and that is cleanups and archiving. That's the last area, or one of the main areas to employ effective governance in Atlassian tools. So what exactly is a cleanup? Well, a cleanup, in our case, is a process where you take a look at the objects that compose each of your applications and remove those objects that aren't used anymore. This helps you with less clutter for your administrators to navigate through, faster searching for your users, freeing disk space that would otherwise be taken by various attachments. On server and data center, this often results in a better performance overall, and also on server and data center, the cleanup would also concern the infrastructure your Atlassian applications are running on, such as browsing through the logs or optimizing the JVM heap or allocating enough disk space and upgrade of the database, checking the network latency. There's many things to consider here. And finally, by removing unused objects, you will achieve more clarity in the tool, well, for everyone. So these are just a few examples of objects you would look for during a cleanup. Most objects that can become deprecated are actually in Jira. That's why so many examples just from Jira are here and are usually parts of various schemes. These might range from Jira projects, statuses, workflows, custom fields, etc. If it can stop being used, it's good to clean it up or review it for a cleanup. We recommend then making a table of all objects that you would like to review and take those that you already did check and did review, along with an initial number of these objects and the final number after you perform the cleanup, so you can measure how did the cleanup go. If, for example, you begin with, let's say, 100 custom fields, and then after the cleanup you arrive at 60, that's nearly 50% cleaned up. So it's definitely a big improvement. You might also decide to perform the backup manually, going through each object category, or try some of the third-party apps that specialize in cleanups. Some examples of this include Power Admin, Optimizer for Jira, Integrity Checker, or for Confluence, Better Content Archiving, which do a part of the job for you. Before you start deleting the objects, make sure to back up your instance and ensure the backup's integrity is okay. You can easily do so by using your testing instance, where you can restore your backup and confirm that you can actually use it if something was to happen. Finally, most of the objects can be easily deleted or disabled, but shouldn't they be archived instead? Could they be, for example, used again? We'll get to that right now. So, archiving. This is a process where you also review your application stack and remove those objects that aren't used, but not delete them outright as you would during a cleanup, because they might be required again one day. Instead, they don't need to be on the production system as they cause unnecessary bloat, worsen application performance, and generally may cause confusion. Examples of these object types that might be used again, but it's not clear when, are Jira projects, Confluence spaces, and Bitbucket projects and repositories. And how to archive exactly? Well, there are several methods. One of them is to make the objects invisible. Make their access permissions administrator only, and maybe not even them. However, the problem here is that the objects will still remain in the system, will take database space, disk space, and you will have to remember that they're there. Cloud Jira and Confluence have similar archival features as a part of their premium offering. However, if you'd like to perform a clean archival, which means removing the objects from the application entirely, you can either take a full backup and again confirm its integrity on your testing instance and store it somewhere safe, or use a specialized app. In case of Jira, there's, for example, Configuration Manager, Project Configurator, Xlate, and in case of Confluence is, for example, the already mentioned Better Content Archiving, or in case of Bitbucket, the Archive plugin for Bitbuckets. That's how it's called, Archive plugin for Bitbucket. So in this webinar, we have went through 4 main areas of governance. We took a look at what exactly does governance mean and why is it beneficial to implement it. We have looked at the topic of change management and the tools necessary for its successful implementation. We have covered the importance of documenting and gave a few tips of what can be documented, and finally went over the topic of cleanups and archiving along with its benefits. You might be thinking now, there's too much. Where exactly should I begin? My advice is don't try to do everything at once. Start with a sturdy change management process with which you will get in control of your instance again. Then document what you already have, and based on this documentation, perform a cleanup and an archival of the objects on your instance. And now it's time for you. Do you have any questions or comments or suggestions of how could we improve this webinar in the future? Or if not, what topic would you like to hear about in the next webinars? Let us know in the chat. Okay, so there's a question from Rolf. Is there a best practice on how to archive Jira projects on Jira server? Now, of course, there aren't any best practices without context, so it largely matters on what you want to achieve with the archive. If you want to archive your whole instance or only few projects, something like that. But As we said on one of our previous slides, if you don't want to take a whole backup of your instance, maybe because it's simply huge and it would take a lot of time, maybe cause some timeouts, then I would recommend using a tool like Configuration Manager from Botron, Project Configurator by Adaptavist, or Xlate from Idelco to make these archives. If you'd like to try some of these add-ons out, then each of these add-ons are actually free to use for 30 days on the Jira server and I believe also data center. And if you need any help with, for example, the Xlate plugin, of which we are the developers, please get in contact with us and we can help you out. So to simplify the answer, I would use one of these add-ons. Okay, a question from Sabina. When archiving projects, I have an XML backup with an indication of the Jira version. Is that the right way to go? I would say absolutely. If you don't want to archive just specific projects, then you can definitely just take an XML backup, or better yet, if you have a server or data center version, a database dump of the database, so you can make sure it doesn't get corrupted during the generation, as XML backup might sometimes do. It's not very often. It doesn't happen very often, but sometimes it does. For example, when many users change things on the system during the backup. So deploying an XML backup and testing it on a testing instance or a staging instance, yes, it's absolutely the way to go. All right, topic idea, making the most out of integrating Jira, Bitbucket, Confluence. Absolutely, that's definitely an area that could be mapped in an interesting webinar. So thanks for that. Prepare a Jira server for migration to cloud, or integration of Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, Bamboo. Yes, in the past we have held a migration webinar, so we might hold it again. And integrating the Atlassian tools, that's a quite interesting topic. All right, changes of custom plugin development from Jira premise to cloud. All right, that's a very interesting topic. Even more so when the Forge platform is being developed. So we might definitely take a look on that, and the use of maybe Idelco's Docker images in trying Jira test versions. Docker images. Atlassian does make some official Docker images for the Atlassian tools, but they are often heavily customized by the users. So that could also prove to be interesting topics for the DevOps teams. All right. Okay, so it does seem that we don't have any other questions or suggestions for future webinars. So thanks a lot for your feedback. And of course, thank you very much for listening to today's webinar. We are Camille Ber and Damien Lauberton from Idelco, and you have attended the Governing Your Atlassian Stack webinar. We would like to ask for your feedback and, of course, your criticism. What went well? What would you improve? And again, what topics would you like to hear about next? Or if maybe you have any trouble implementing effective governance, we can help, just like we did our other customers. You can contact us at the provided email, and I will get back to you soon. Thanks again for listening. Have a good rest of the day.